Good morning and welcome to the Merry Mama. Welcome on this cold, frigid morning. I sure hope that wherever you are, you're staying warm. The boys and I do not plan on going outside at all today, so we're gonna hunker down and try to stay warm. And what better way to stay warm on a cold, cold winter day than a nice hot bowl of soup, right? So if you missed it, this week on the Merry Mama blog, I shared 15 of my favorite soups to make and our family's favorite soups to eat. So if you haven't checked that out yet, head over there, and I think all of them but one have links that you can get to. So they're all free recipes and ways that you can get some of our favorite soup recipes, as well as some of my favorite soup making tools. So if you haven't checked that out, you'll want to go and read that. So for today's Wednesday chat, I thought we would talk about what to do with leftover soup. Because a lot of times when you make a big crock pot or instant pot or stovetop pot full of soup, you're gonna probably have some leftovers, and some days that's okay, you can eat on it for the rest of the week. Sometimes you get a little tired though of eating leftovers, and a great way to use up those leftovers is to freeze it. And actually, I should mention that I always recommend that whenever you make anything, but especially soup, go ahead and make extras. Plan for leftovers. Double your recipe, or maybe times 1.5 or something, and plan on those leftovers so that you can stick them in the freezer, because then on a day when you don't feel like cooking, or your plans get disrupted, or you just forget to make a plan, you can pop out that soup. And especially if you have an instant pot, you can do it straight from frozen. So even if you've gotten to like 5 o'clock and you have nothing to eat for supper, you can cook frozen food in the Instant Pot. And so especially if you've frozen it in a way that it can go straight in the Instant Pot, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes, then that works great. You can just throw it in the Instant Pot. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure how long it takes to cook it then, but it's not very long. It doesn't take very long at all to reheat that soup. So go ahead, make yourself an extra batch and stick it in the freezer. And so now I'm going to give you my top 3 ways of freezing leftover soup. So the first way is you can just find yourself some plastic containers. They can be specialty freezer containers, but they don't necessarily have to be. You can just take like an old gallon ice cream tub and fill it with soup and stick it in the freezer. You might want to put a layer of plastic wrap over the top before you put the plastic lid on. It just helps reduce the freezer burn a little bit. And you're probably gonna want to use that soup up fairly quickly, or it will get kind of crystallized on the top. So it's not my favorite way to freeze soup, but it is really easy and really convenient, and it stays nice and organized in the freezer. So speaking of freezer containers, I really like these little freezer containers that are more of an individual size. So these aren't great, obviously, for freezing a large batch, like all your leftovers. But if we just have a little bit of leftovers left, or sometimes I'll just take like 4 of them and fill them up, it's a great size for an individual portion. So I'll put some in here and put the cover on and stick it in the freezer, and then Levon can pop them out for his lunch, or I can pop one out for my lunch and just reheat it. And it's really convenient because it's already all ready to go. So that's a great way too to prep for lunches during the week, is to use these handy dandy little containers. But you can use pretty much any kind of plastic container with a lid. And so that's one way of freezing your leftover soup. Another way is to do it in a plastic container with a lid. So you can get like one of these Pyrex containers with the lid, or you can even use a glass mason jar, although make sure that you've left plenty of headspace. I was not planning on sticking this in the freezer, so I filled this puppy all the way up. But if you're gonna freeze it, make sure you leave plenty of headspace because it will expand as it freezes. And you definitely want to use wide mouth jars and jars without any kind of a shoulder at all. Like here's one that I just emptied out, and this is a quart jar, and here, over here, there you can see it. See how it has a little bit of a shoulder here? You don't want to use those, trust me. I made that mistake, and even though I left plenty of headspace, it cracked in the freezer. Something about the pressure as it comes up and it freezes, it'll bust that jar. Probably. I mean, you might be okay, because I had some that lasted and they were okay, but I had like 2 or 3 one time when I made chicken broth that cracked on me, so, and that makes a mess. So you probably don't want to risk it. Don't use anything with a shoulder, but you could use something that goes straight down and you can freeze it that way. So that's another good way to do individual portions, kind of like these. If you're going to be freezing it a little bit longer, you might prefer the glass jars, or if you're just trying to get away from plastic, you might want to use the mason jars. So glass bowls, glass jars, glass anything, as long as you're leaving space for it to expand when it freezes, you should be good to go. And then the final way that I'm going to talk about, there are lots of different ways to freeze your leftover soup, but probably my favorite way of freezing leftover soup is to put it in gallon freezer bags. So I'm going to tilt my camera here a little bit just so you can see. And here's some chili that I made last week, and now it needs to go in the freezer. And so you just pour it in your gallon-sized freezer bag. Lay it flat, make sure you label it, lay it flat, and then stick it somewhere that it can lay flat in the freezer. And then once it's frozen completely and it's solid, then they're really easy to store because you can just stack them this way, or you can stack them up this way once they're frozen and they're flat. I've seen some people get plastic containers and then they just stack their soup. So it's a really good way to organize your soup in the freezer so that they don't take up very much room. If, however, you are going to be using your Instant Pot to reheat them, if you know you're going to pull it out in time to let it thaw, that this way still works. But if you think that you're probably going to be putting it in the Instant Pot at the last minute frozen, you might not want to freeze it laying flat because it's not going to fit. It's just going to stick up beyond the top of your Instant Pot. So sometimes when I freeze soup, I don't lay it flat to freeze, and I will stick it in the bag like this, but in a round Pyrex container, and then you know, kind of squish it around so that it takes the shape of the Pyrex container. And so then what it does is it freezes it in a nice round shape, and then when I'm ready to use it and stick it in the Instant Pot, I can just pop it out. If you run it under a little warm water, it'll thaw it just enough to get it out of the bag. If you can't get it out of the bag, you can always cut it out of the bag, and that works too. But then it's a nice round shape. You can just plop it in your Instant Pot, set it for, I don't know, it's like 10 minutes, but don't quote me on that, and then you're good to go. So it's not quite as convenient to store in your freezer, but it's really convenient for reheating in the Instant Pot. So you might try it that way. Try it both ways, see what you like, but those are a couple ways to store your soup in the freezer bags. So those are 3 really easy ways to freeze your leftover soup. One thing I wanted to mention, no matter what way you choose to freeze your soup, you should always, always, always chill your soup first. Do not stick it straight from your hot crock pot or Instant Pot or stovetop in something and then stick it straight in the freezer. It's gonna freeze or burn like crazy because all that heat, and then it cools and it's gonna form lots of condensation, and then that condensation freezes. So what you're gonna wanna do is let it cool down first on the counter until you can stick it in your freezer, or sorry, your fridge. and then stick it in your fridge for a while until it cools off. When it's completely cool, then you can stick it in the freezer, and that should really cut down on your freezer burn. So thanks for joining me. If you have any questions about other ways that I freeze soup, or some of these products that I was using, ask your questions in the comments and I'll get around to answering them probably this afternoon. But thanks for watching, and go check out all those soups and let me know which ones you try. Thanks. Have a great warm day.